want to introduce you to Will Tuttle and Madeline Tuttle, and they've been on the road vegan activists for a long, long time. And we became friends through connections with having him speak here and at the Veg Fest. And when this COVID thing broke out, we emailed a little bit like, what do you think about this? You know, and found we were on the same page. And Will's been digging deeper into sort of the dark side of what's going on in humanity for a longer time than I had. And so I think a lot of us speak that same language, but for those that are watching online, you may not, and it would be good to realize that, like many other communities, the vegan community is split on this issue. And Will's going to address that issue and things related to our treatment of animals and to our treatment of people.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Let's have a hand for Susan and she really worked hard to try to create a space for the community to thrive and to be really under attack. I think the human community is under attack right now. And so it's really up to us to protect the integrity of our relationships with each other and with nature. And if we don't, I think the forces that are at work they'll keep going. I mean, unless we meet them in some way and say no. So yeah, for me, and Madeline also, we were really on the same page on this. As soon as I heard about this thing way back in January of 2020, we had just finished up on Christmas of 2019 a big lecture tour in Asia. We did all over Asia. In Taiwan, we did a Christmas Eve concert in Taiwan with probably 400 or 500 people. And then came back here, and then I heard about this COVID. And from the very beginning, I said to people, my concern about getting COVID on a scale from 1 to 100 is 1. My concern about what the government's going to do about this is 99. Yeah. I mean, I never for a second thought there's anything to it. And I just kind of watched with horror. It was kind of like 9/11 every day, you know, just, hello, it's, you know, another false flag, this false flag, you know, just going on every day. And people who I thought were not, extremely gullible, turned out to be extremely gullible, a lot of them. And to my shock and horror, really, because I thought, how can you not see it's so obvious. I mean, everything about it was obvious. The PCR test, the inventor of the PCR test, Kerry Mullis, was telling people from the very beginning, you can never use this test to diagnose anything. And that was what the whole thing was based. The foundation of the whole terror campaign was people are testing positive. Healthy people are testing positive. Or people who are ready to die are testing positive and they died of COVID. You know? I mean, it was such a joke. It was like the lies were so obvious. I mean, they weren't even, it was almost like they were just rubbing our noses to see how stupid we are. I mean, are we actually going to believe this? No, I mean, no. They're just like playing with us, like in the most obvious way to make it, to just show how really stupid human beings have become. My PhD from Berkeley is in education. I was focusing on peace education, and then I focused from there on intuition. My dissertation was on educating intuition in adults, and it was actually nominated as the best dissertation at Berkeley that year. Oh. And Berkeley was the #1 graduate school in education in the whole North America. I focused on that because my feeling was that our educational system is completely destroying our intelligence, the intelligence of human beings. You know, and so, you know, there's quite a lot of hand-wringing going on, like people saying, well, the educational system in the United States isn't working. You know, people that come through the educational system are not capable of critical thinking. People who come through the educational system really don't understand history, geography, politics, anything really. I mean, they're not learning very well, and they're just being taught to fit into a machine and to be good consumers, and they're not taught how to have healthy relationships or eat healthfully or anything really. And so they say the educational system is not working. And so my whole point was, it's working exactly the way it's supposed to work. It's totally working exactly right. That's exactly what's intended. Rockefeller, back in the 1920s, when he paid for the Flexner Report, which was created the whole medical educational system, they did not want any doctors to have any kind of holistic perspective of health. They did not want doctors to have any idea about nutrition or lifestyle or meditation or nature or anything, because what they realized is that reductionism is profitable. You know, a reductionistic approach, when you reduce everything and take away the context, so people are, and that's what dumbs people down. When we have a reductionistic approach, we can't make connections. And so medical education became reductionistic, and everything, you know, legal, architectural, whatever it is. It's just, how do you do, you know, we learn protocols. Like, we teach the people protocols. We don't teach them anything that actually would help our society to actually evolve toward a more healthy way of being. So the underlying dilemma, I would say, for our society today is we have so many people that have been wounded by the educational system, really, and by the food system. I mean, it goes together. You know, the food, you know, it's not only meat, dairy, and eggs. I mean, being a vegan, which is, you know, meat, dairy, and eggs concentrate toxins. People are taking all these toxins in, their bodies get toxified. When you have a toxified body, it's hard to think clearly, it's hard to feel comfortable in your body. The underlying narrative in the food system of animal agriculture is that we're superior, they're inferior, we dominate nature, we dominate animals, we especially dominate female animals. It's all about suppressing the sacred feminine. It's about suppressing what's wild and beautiful and natural and abundant, to own it, to imprison it, and to exploit it, right? I mean, that's the whole point. And so, and you're exploiting the most vulnerable, which is the female and the newborns, right? The newborns are born into slavery, and they're immediately exploited. They're impregnated on rape rocks, and they're just children still. I mean, what we do is sexual perversity on a massive scale for these animals. And so that kind of, you know, food system where we're eating that food, there's an educational component to that. Right? We're teaching, every time we're sitting at the table, we're learning that we humans are superior, these animals are nothing, and that the feminine dimension, like milk and eggs, is to be dominated. The sexual reproduction and the beautiful nurturing gifts that come out, like maternal secretions, are to be exploited. So that's an education that's going on, and it's what's called, I learned in my PhD research, that's called paradigmatic education, right? That's the thing to understand, is there's several levels of education going on at any time in this classroom, for example. There's the content level, which is what they say, and you test it on the content, like you'll learn the math or you'll learn the history. But at a deeper level, which they never test you on, is what the kids really learn, or what the people really learn, which is called paradigmatic learning. You learn the paradigm, right? The paradigm, the Greek word paradigm means pattern. You're learning the pattern of, and what's that? You're learning that knowledge is divided up into discrete subjects, which have hard edges. You know, and you just kind of stick everybody into a box of what their specialty is. And you teach that in order to know something, you have to be able to regurgitate it on an examination. And you have to be successful, you have to please the authority figures, right? This is the things that nobody forgets. You learn that in your bones, right? That's what's really being taught, the paradigmatic level. They pretend you're learning content. They don't care about content. They want you to learn the paradigm. And so we learn these paradigms, and they're invisible. For most people, they're just invisible, because people aren't taught to meditate. You know, people aren't taught to examine the contents of consciousness. They're taught to identify with their consciousness, like, this is what I think. They're not taught to actually witness and be aware and like, That's never taught, and there's a reason for that. They don't want anyone to be self-reflective, to reflect back, to turn the light back, to understand the truth of being. That would be bad for profits. That would be people going, why do I want to buy a fourth car or whatever it is? You know, why do I want more things? You know, the whole idea is to create people, like Rockefeller said in the very beginning. We do not want people, because it's this very predatory philanthropy is what's really happening. You have these foundations, like the Rockefeller Foundation, now the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, these foundations, and when you fund money with strings attached, that's powerful. And so that's what's happening. And so, this whole web is being woven, and I've been watching it for decades and seeing it happen. I could see it happen when I was at Berkeley, how as they kept cutting the budget for the universities and the colleges, and they didn't have funding, and then the corporations and the philanthropic organizations and the governmental, like the CDC, they all came in with funding for research. The pharmaceutical came in for funding for research, college professors and so forth, and research assistants. They're all getting paid now by corporations and by governmental agencies. They're not getting just, so the research is all driven with an agenda in order to create research that will help market products. That's basically it. But the average person is not equipped to understand this. They're not taught any of this. And one of the things I think that's really interesting, you're probably aware of this, but I think it was the Carnegie Mellon did a study recently on vaccine hesitancy and education, right? Mm-hmm. I just love that. It was so funny. So it was like, so the number one highest rate of vaccine hesitancy was among people with PhDs. That was number one. But number two was people who had never even graduated from high school. That was number two. And then it went kind of like, the worst, then it went down, and then people with high school education, they're less likely to be hesitant about vaccines. They call it hesitancy. And then people who had a college degree were even less. People who had a master's degree were even less. Huh. And people who had a professional degree were the least. They all get vaccinated. Mm-hmm. And you think, why? But then you get to PhDs, it goes up to here. Huh. And so people are like, why is that? Okay, it's obvious in a way. To me, it's obvious because basically, when you see education as a wounding process, and the more you go through it, the worse you get wounded. By the time, so the people that didn't even go through high school, they got it the best, right? Their mind is still basically, they go, oh, we know it's a bunch of baloney. They understand that, their minds are still halfway intact. But once they go through high school and then college, they've already been forced. I want to please the authorities. I want to get the good grade. I want to do whatever they say. I'll do it. Okay, I'll do it. All right. Okay. They get more and more hammered down, more dumbed down the more they go through. If they get a master's degree, they're really dumbed down. They got to prove that they've mastered this. I've mastered this tiny little thing, that they've mastered. And then if they get a professional degree, like they're MD, right? They're the dumbest, right? They're in a prison. They can't even, if they think outside the box, it's history. But the PhD has to make an original contribution, right? You can't get a PhD without making an original contribution to your field. And so suddenly, and I think also maybe PhDs attract different type of people too, perhaps, who don't merely want to go. But for some reason, the PhDs are the most willing to question the official narrative. And I think it's because of that capacity of developing or maybe having to not just question everything, to want to get to the roots, or look deeper. Because I think that's what real education should be about, like to make an original contribution, to understand and to share that, right, with the community. But most of the other forms of education, it's not about that. It's just about proving that you are part of the club. I know this, and it's trying to get approval. So that's why I think it's important to understand, like as a vegan, I've been complaining about this for years, and you're all aware of it, that doctors don't get nutritional education to speak of, right? They don't know anything. So, but the average person, when they talk about their diet, they'll say, "Oh, my doctor told me I should eat this, so that's why I'm eating it." Or they're doctors, but the doctor knows something about education. They don't know anything. They don't know. How are they going to know? The education, maybe the little bit that they do get is paid for by the pharmaceutical industry in the background. Well, it's the same thing about vaccines. They get no education about vaccines. They have like one hour class somewhere where they go through the schedule and they say, this is this vaccine schedule and this is what it's about. And just, it's good, it's the best thing we have. Now, we got to get to what really matters, which is how you diagnose people and give them the medication that they need. Then they spend 4 years on that, right? Mm-hmm. They don't talk about vaccines at all, nothing. But the average person thinks, well, my doctor thinks I should get vaccinated. He knows everything, so okay. It's the same problem. It's like the system is based to dumb down the people who have to do the dirty work of actually inflicting the exploitation so that they don't have a conscience about it. They just don't know any better. And they just think, oh, it must be good. And of course, as this is the key point, I think, is this saying by Upton Sinclair, who wrote The Jungle. He said, the hardest thing in the world is to try to get someone to understand something when their salary is dependent upon them not understanding it, right? Mm-hmm. That sums up everything. Mm-hmm. The hardest thing in the world is to try to get someone to understand something when their salary depends upon them not understanding it. So that's the situation. And so one of the things we keep wondering, Susan and I talk about, is why is it that the vegan movement is so divided about this? Why is it? And you would think, I've been a vegan since 1980, for 41 years. And so, but I've noticed in being in the vegan movement that there are a lot of, most vegans do question the official narratives in our society when it comes to food, right? That's why they're vegans. They question, they go, well, I'm not going to eat meat, dairy, and eggs. So you would think they have this spirit of questioning. That's good, that's healthy. We should question, like Krishnamurti said, it's not a good idea to be well-adjusted to a profoundly sick society, right? So he's well-adjusted to it. So vegans kind of understand that. And they go, yeah, okay, I know that food's making me sick, so I'm not going to eat it. So I think the problem with the vegan movement is that vegans question that, but when it comes to health and vaccines and doctors and pharmaceutical industries and medications and all those things, for me, from the very beginning, from my research, it was clear that the main enemy that animals have is, of all the industries, it's actually the pharmaceutical industry. Most people think, no, it's the meat industry or the dairy industry or the meat, dairy, and egg industries. They are. They're the ones doing it, but they're not so evil when it comes to animals or so intent as the pharmaceutical industry. Because we see it happening already as we begin to develop more plant-based alternatives. We find that these companies like Smithfield and a lot of these Maple Leaf, all these meat processing plants, they're investing and they're buying into and they're buying up. And they think, because they think, well, people have to eat. If they're not going to eat meat, then we'll sell them the plant-based meat. They're going to say plant-based, good. So they're kind of, they'll get out, they can transition, But the pharmaceutical industry, it requires a massive flood of sick people. So the worst thing for the pharmaceutical industry is people like me, right, who basically have never used any pharmaceuticals in the last 50 years. I've never bought one aspirin or anything, nothing, zero. That's the worst nightmare for them is people that are actually eating an organic, whole food, plant-based diet and also taking responsibility for their health and not smoking, drinking, exercising, being in nature, having a mission, being happy, understanding health, understanding what the foundation of health is. That's their worst nightmare. And so what the pharmaceutical industry does and where it makes its money is through animal agriculture. It's dependent on animal agriculture more than animal agriculture is, in a way. The pharmaceutical industry, for number one, their profits come from 3 areas. And I've talked about this for years, but they're huge profits. Massive profits. There's over 10,000 different drugs, hormones, antibiotics. 90% of all antibiotics, all these billions of animals who are stuck in these stinking sheds, they are injected over and over again. They're antibiotics and everything. Drugs, they are drugged to the hilt. So the pharmaceutical industry makes massive profits on all these drugs to animals. Then, for some reason, people eat the flesh of these toxic drugged animals or their secretions like dairy and eggs. So then they get sick, right? So then they get diabetes and osteoporosis, liver disease, kidney disease, Alzheimer's, heart disease, obesity, all this stuff from basically from eating that stuff. Now, like cancer, right? Huge industries that the pharmaceutical industry loves all that sickness. I mean, that's like, woohoo. So people eat that stuff. So then that's how they make all their money, is from people eating that food. And so they have they have billions of dollars in profits for cancer and diabetes and all these medications that people don't have for the rest of their life. But then the biggest of the three, animal and that, there's a third one where they make even more profits. And that's the one that I think is interesting in a way, because it's more subtle, but I think it's also directly results from animal agriculture. And that is the profits that they make for drugs for mental illness. That's their biggest profit. Their biggest profits are for drugs for depression, anxiety, and insomnia. And what are the animals going through? The animals are depressed, anxious, and can't sleep, right? They're like driven into insanity. So we're sowing the seeds of absolute mental anguish and horror to billions of animals. People are eating all that mental and emotional and existential horror and depression and anxiety, and are feeling depressed and anxious. And the pharmaceutical is like, yes, 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 this is how we make our money, fear, 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 and all this horror. And the pharmaceutical industry is the one that is subjecting millions, tens of millions, probably hundreds, at least tens of millions of animals to horrible vivisection experiments, right? I mean, if you knew what they do to these animals, every single drug, including the COVID drugs, all the COVID people, some vegans go, oh, the COVID drugs, they don't have any animal products in them, because all the other vaccines all have animal products in them. These ones supposedly don't. They've all been tested on animals. They've all killed, and they still kill. Right now, they're killing lots of animals. They tested on animals, and they're testing, of course, on human animals too. But anyway, the pharmaceutical industry is about torturing and killing animals. I mean, that's their main thing. And the pharmaceutical industry is a subset of the chemical industry. The chemical industry is the real industry. Pharmaceutical industry is a subset of the chemical industry. The chemical industry is a subset of the petrochemical industry. So we're really talking about Rockefeller. We're really talking about this petrochemical industry and that money that came in 100 years ago, that came pouring in, and the very savvy ways that they set up a medical system and an educational system and a food system, all based on petrochemicals. All based on petrochemicals, and all based on getting people and destroying homeopathy, destroying naturopathy, destroying herbals, destroying everything else, and just funneling, and then taking control of the media and using the power of this predatory philanthropy to just take over basically the United Nations and governmental agencies and so forth. This has been infiltrating with money. So you probably are aware of these things, but just the overarching view. So that's the reason I think that vegans have a hard time. It's because I've been saying this for decades, that veganism is a two-step process. The easy step is going vegan, right? But you can't stop there. You've got to take the second step, which is to then embody what veganism is, which is actually love, which is love, right? I mean, veganism is love, not just theoretically, but actually living it towards those who are vulnerable. That means animals, future generations, children, and workers, and so forth. And so most vegans don't take that second step, because that's really introspection and questioning everything, how our food choices really affect, and all our choices are affecting others. And so, since most vegans don't practice contemplation, meditation, not going to doctors is a spiritual practice. Don't go to a doctor. That is a spiritual practice. Don't go. Just don't do it. Find another way. Start to rely on your intuition. I've had so many spiritual healings because I wouldn't go to a doctor, or I didn't want to do it. And Madeline too. We've both worked on not going. I've had times when I had to sign a release, no, I'm not going to do it. I had accidents and things, and they had an ambulance there. And I said, "You got to go to the doctor." I said, "Nope, I'm not going. I'm not going to go." And I worked on it, and the body heals. The body heals, and especially the most disease is mental. I'd say 90% is emotional, mental stuff. And so we've got to we've got to work on our relationships and on our purpose and on our inner unsolved childhood wounds, play out, I had this terrible pain in my back for years, and I realized it was because when I was a little kid, at a certain point, I wanted to keep the world away. I was like, I was afraid. And so reaching out, so I got this pain in my back. I was on this long retreat. I was all by myself in the wilderness. I was meditating, and I got this thought. It came into my mind like someone shouted it. It was, a pain in the body is a pain in the mind. Mm-hmm. And I just went, whoa. And I started writing about it, and it all came flooding up. I understood exactly. As a little kid, I had gone through some wounding like we all go through, and I was like, all right, And so it hurt so much to reach out, like oh, ow, oh, it hurt, oh, And then I started writing in my journal, I started realizing that's that little boy with his pain that he never dealt with really. And now after doing thousands of hours of meditation, it was ready to come up, And then I knew that little boy, I love that little boy, he's fine, he can reach, and that pain just was gone, it just disappeared. Because, but I could have gone to a doctor, and I could have had my back operated on, I could have, I mean, that's what happens. People are taught not to introspect, not to get to the root of it. If we don't get to the root of the problem, we just keep suppressing it, and our body-mind wants to heal. It wants to so it's telling us, it's giving us a hint, always getting these hints, and we're taught to drug it down and not detoxify the toxic emotions that we have or whatever. So that's why I think most vegans don't take that second step. So they're still in this childish mode of trusting the doctor, the authority, the drug companies. Don't trust these companies. I mean, these doctors. The doctors are good people, but they've been completely indoctrinated into a system of exploitation of animals and human beings. They don't realize it, but that's what they're doing. They're glorified drug dealers. That's all they are, basically. And so I think since vegans haven't taken that second step, then they're very vulnerable to being exploited by this whole thing. And the other aspect I just want to mention is that within the vegan movement, we have this class of vegans that is worshipped because they're the ones that give our whole vegan movement credibility. And that class of vegans is the vegan MDs. Mm-hmm. And so the vegan MDs are on the highest pedestal, on top of the pedestal, on top of the pedestal. And it's like, you bow at their feet because they're bringing the vegan message, which we care about so much, with science. You can solve heart disease and you can heal all your diseases. That vegans are actually healthy, because that's the big problem. It's like, you vegans are all sick and weak and blah blah blah. So we owe them a lot. We do. I mean, I love these guys. They're great. They've really helped our movement tremendously. They're fantastic, really. But they're MDs, and so they're in a golden cage. They cannot, if they say a word, and they know it at a deep level, questioning the official narrative about vaccines or COVID or this, they'd lose their license. They would go from being they'd become untouchable scum. Right? They would, and they don't know it. And the problem is most of them, they don't have any other way to make a living. So for them, it's absolutely terrifying to step outside the circle of what to question this, and they won't. So we can't expect them to. So they're leading the whole vegan movement into a disaster. So the point is, the vegan movement is based on human beings advocating for animals. How can I advocate for animals when I'm being censored? How can I advocate for animals when I can't assemble with other people? How can I advocate for animals when I can't even talk in a church about anything? And this is a spiritual issue too. And if we don't have freedom of speech and freedom of assembly, our basic rights, we can't be vegan. We can't be vegan advocates. We can't even be. To be a vegan, from my point of view, includes being an advocate. Includes trying to spread the message. So this is a direct assault on all of our advocacy efforts that we've been trying to make in terms of animal liberation, in terms of human liberation on every level. I have been getting lambasted for the last year and a half. I mean, I've been called, I just got an email the other day from a guy calling me 4-letter words, you know. You know, a vegan, he said, "You're making the vegan movement look bad, you, blah, 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 blah," you know. And, you know, I send him a love letter back. I just, you know, it's like, you know, you know, and we have to find a way to love each other and to understand that this really is about listening to each other and not calling each other names, you know, and respecting each other. Veganism is about kindness and respect for other living beings, including human beings. So our movement, there's a tremendous amount of fear, you know, and that fear, unfortunately, brings out the worst in people. And it actually, in a way, is a way of, a strange way of kind of separating the wheat from the chaff. And that's what seems to me what's happening. And hopefully we can heal the divisions that are happening, but it's a very powerful time to be alive. So I think it's good, instead of thinking, "Oh no, what a terrible time to be alive." It's easy to think that way, I think, considering what's going on, but to think it's a time where we can especially make a positive difference, when the chips are down, in a sense. So I'm going to stop here because I would like to have more of a dialogue too, but these are some of the ideas that I'm so grateful to have a forum to be able to talk about. And I know a lot of you are, most of you are well versed in a lot of this already, but I think it's always good to hear it from another perspective sometimes.
It's a brilliant way of putting all that together.
Yeah, I like
really,
that.
I think that's really
Yes,
something we all need to hear and we need to get out there and share with other people too. I think,
Thanks.
yeah. I guess there was one other thing I was thinking about too, that somebody was talking about online, was talking about we need almost like a constitution, like a Bill of Rights for human beings that's global. And I was thinking, like, what are the basic rights? Like bodily autonomy is one of them. You know, to not be tortured and hurt and by others.
And injected with medications. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Freedom of choice, free will, as long as you
It's a
don't hurt others.
the Nuremberg principles.
Yeah, all those kinds of things,
Yeah.
and they apply to animals, other animals, and to us, both. And so,
Yeah.
sort of articulating those things in a way that everybody can get behind would be like I think a new direction we could be taking in the world.
Yeah, and you would, right, and I think everyone would certainly agree. I mean, you know, that's a good idea. I mean, maybe not about animals because they want to eat them still, but certainly about humans.
But the karmic aspect of that is
Yeah.
to be considered, right?
Consciousness has to get to that place.
Right.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to Will, I mean, wow, everything you said was like, it's just so beautiful to me that another human being has this wisdom and understands this. I have a very large property and around it is free range cattle. And a couple months ago, I was going, my property, you have to go through a pretty long dirt road to get there. I watched a baby calf nursing on their mother, and the calf made this eye contact with me when he had the, you know, when he was nursing, and we made this eye contact, and instantly I felt this sentient soul within that calf. It made me cry. I felt it inside me so strong, and what you're bringing forth is so beautiful because our world is holographic, and what we are doing with the animals is now is being done to us.
Right.
And so as we understand the plants and the animals and all the aspect each other, they are all interconnected, and as we heal that and have an honoring of all life, I think the whole hologram shifts and changes also.
So,
Yeah, that holographic model, that holographic idea is critically important. I mean, that's really important. When I was writing the World Peace Diet, can I take my book for a second? I wrote about that actually, and the book, I actually wrote the book like a holograph. You know, it's like, I studied this a little bit, holography, years ago, and I knew a guy who made holographs, and there's those experiments where if you take a regular photograph and you cut off part of it, then you just can't see that part, right? But if you take a holographic photograph and you cut off part of it, you still see the whole image. It's just blurrier. And you cut off more, and you still see the whole thing. It's just a little blurrier. So the holographic photograph is different from a two-dimensional holograph. And we're taught in our educational system this sort of two-dimensional way of relating to reality. It's kind of, and so reductionistic and seeing everything in a linear kind of a way. And the holographic model is you keep adding layers of complexity, and you see it, but every part is connected to every other part. And so when I wrote the World Peace Study, it was like you give the basic idea, and then you go around again and add another level of complexity, and then you go around again with another level, and you go around again, and so the whole thing, it's like this gigantic mandala, but every part is connected to every other part, and so so that's the thing. I think it's when we understand even one part, we can understand the whole thing, in a sense. So if you look deeply into the eyes of that little calf, and our relationship with that calf, you suddenly, from a holographic point of view, you saw the whole. You saw everything. I mean, right in that
universal
moment,
soul.
you see everything. You see the universal soul, but you also see the dilemma of humanity versus nature, and the ownership of other living beings as property. And I own you. I own your baby. I'm gonna kill your baby, and I'm gonna kill you, and then I'm gonna pregnate you again, and kill your baby again, and pregnate you again, kill your baby, and then I'm gonna kill you. I mean, that's basically, you saw that.
Well, I was wondering if you could share what you were talking about at lunch, about the hypnosis, the different groups and so forth.
Oh yeah, that was interesting. There's a good video of Huxley, Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World back in 1948 or 50, I think it was in the 50s. And I read that book a while ago. I mean, it's been quite a few years, but I remember when I read it, it's quite interesting, because it seems like he was predicting some of what's happening now, in a certain sense, that suddenly in the last year and a half. And there was an interview with him way back then in the 1950s, and he was talking about how globalist forces could control humanity through using certain principles of controlling the way people perceive reality. And he said it's not that difficult. And he talked about hypnotists, how hypnotists control people's minds and perceptions. And I've gone through this because myself, I'll just say this in a quick little thing, but when I was in high school in Massachusetts, the high school psychology department brought in a stage hypnotist. And I remember sitting there, and the audience was full of the auditorium. This guy came in, and he went up on the stage, and he asked for volunteers from the audience. And so about 7 or 8 people volunteered and went up on the stage and sat in chairs and looking out. And so this guy put them all into a trance, one after the other. There was one that he couldn't get to go into a trance. And he said, all right, we need somebody else. I need another volunteer. And somebody else came up. And so he got all of them into a trance. It was pretty amazing what he got them to do. He would get them to do things and experience things. Like he would take this piece of chalk, and he would say, this piece of chalk is pretty hot. Yeah, so you might feel it. And he went like this. Oh God, damn, that thing is hot. And they really, and they were really. It's like, God, that's amazing. I mean, by telling this hypnotized person this chalk is hot, they really, got a little blister on their arm, from that hot chalk. And then, at the very end, this last little thing was he said to one of the people who was a friend of mine. I knew her. She lived in my neighborhood. Her name was Lucy. And he said, Lucy, at the very end of when you go back and you sit down again, I'm going to take you out of your, put you all back into normal. Go sit down, and I'm going to have a wrapping up little speech, and then I'll say to the whole group, I'll say, "Okay, everyone, thank you very much." And when you hear me say, "Okay, everyone, thank you very much," you are going to jump out of your seat and say, "I feel great." And so then he took everybody out of their thing, and then everybody went back. So he was going, rattled on, gave his little thing, and told everybody, these are principles of hypnotism, and just be aware. And I noticed that Lucy wasn't listening to him. I thought, oh no. She was chatting to her friend, Laura, and they were chattering, they were just like talking about things, and she wasn't even listening to him. And then he said, "Thank you, everyone." Something, and then she jumped. She was in the middle of talking to Laura, and she jumped out of her chair and she said, "I feel great." And then she went, "Oh no!" And she went like this. She was so embarrassed, you know. Everybody laughed, you know. But I thought, dang, that really works. I mean, whoa, she didn't even listen, and she still jumped up. You know, it was planted. Anyway, so Aldous Huxley was saying that you know, that stage hypnotists know that roughly 25% of the people will be really easy to hypnotize. You can kind of give them a suggestion, they'll kind of go right. They'll go right with it. They'll be right there. About 25% of the people, you really hard. You know, they just, they're like, "What are you talking about? No, I feel fine. I'm not. No. They're just right there. They're not going to go anywhere." And about 50% are in the middle, and you can, if you just kind of are skillful, you can get them. So that's what they kind of rely on. So they have to know there'll be a few that they won't get. What Aldous Huxley was saying was that in a society, what the marketers are doing, he was talking about marketing, he was talking about also governmental or social control people who want to control society, is you work on the 25% that are easy. You get them. And once you get them trained, they will get the other 50%. They'll bring them right along, because you create this field. The 25% are pretty easy. You kind of tell them with an authoritative thing, you know, this is how it is, and they'll go, yes. They'll kind of go along. And the other 50% will see them and they'll go, And once they go on, and you'll have 25% who will be tough. They'll be like, I don't know, I'm not going along with that.
Well, we all know who we are.
Right. That's playing out right now. Of course, these people who are doing it, I mean, there's many layers to this, but there's also, and I kind of hate to talk about it, but there are secret societies that use initiation rituals. Well, I think some of the Freemasons, some other ones, it's like they're a club where they put the loyalty to their club above everything else, right? So they will stick together no matter what. And so people like Fauci and other people, they're in these secret societies.
The Jesuits.
And the judges too. So Fauci knows that he's protected, right? There's a club of the highest people in decision, in the legislature, in the judiciary, in the executive branch, in the media, in the corporations. Their loyalty is to each other before they could care about the country or whatever. You know, that's far below. So they have that connection. But they get to that point of intense loyalty through initiations that break down their personality structure in a certain way. They break it down. They force them into extreme embarrassment or extreme vulnerability that breaks down their basic structure, their personality structure, and then it reconfigures in a way that's aligned with. It seems very powerful. You know, now we're together. You know, but that's what they're doing. So they're leading our entire society through initiation rituals, and like social. Isolation is the main thing. That's one of the things you do. When you isolate people, they don't have reference points around them to talk about, so you keep people isolated. And masking is an ancient one. I mean, masking is a powerful way to subsume the personality into a collective. You can't see, you can't speak. And it's blocking the spirit. I mean, spirit means breath, right? So you're blocking the connection with the breath, with the spirit, and keeping the person inhaling their own exhaust, right? I mean, that. Not only is physically toxic, but it's actually makes you into a subhuman being. And even animals can breathe, right? It turns you into a subhuman. I cannot stand seeing people wearing masks. It's a visceral level. I want to rip it off. Don't do this. It turns people into. People don't realize what they're doing when they go parading around with these masks on, where they can't smile, they can't convey, they can't speak. They're turning themselves into an object. It's of self-enslavement. And long before all this, I taught college courses in history. And one of the main texts that I use, which I think is a very important foundation for all of this, Eric Fromm, do you know the social psychologist Eric Fromm? He wrote a book called Escape from Freedom. I studied this, I read this book like at least 10 times, because I taught this class over and over again, so I was always reading this book, so I like had it the whole book memorized. But the Escape from Freedom talks about the authoritarian personality structure. And what he said basically is that we live in a society, he wrote this way back in the 50s, where there's two tendencies that are driven home in our society that are basically propagated. One he called the sadistic, and the other is the masochistic. But basically and we can see it playing out, the masochist is yearning to be dominated, and the sadist is yearning to dominate, right? So, and they go together, and together they create what he called the authoritarian personality structure or character structure. And so, just eating animal foods is already, where we dominate the animals, right? We're superior. We own them, we breed them, we use them, we have life and death. But then all the organizational structures in our society, the corporate organizational structure, the military, the governmental, education, even in many cases the family, it's based on power over and submitting to that power, and then you have power over others. So it's all this it's hierarchical, this hierarchical thing. And so that authoritarian power structure, it puts into us at a very deep level that we absolutely have to obey people above us. It's how we get our grades, it's how we get approval, it's how we get everything, and then we can turn around and do the same thing to those below us.
Yeah.
And this is what he called the escape from freedom, because those people that are in that are not free. We are actually enslaved by the system we're in, and we don't realize it. We're literally vulnerable to, we'll do whatever they tell us. And then we have, of course, there's experiments, the Milgram experiments, experiments where you had, typically, he did it with all kinds of people. If you study his experiments, it wasn't just college students. He did a lot with college students, but he did a lot with adults, people in the community, ministers, priests, executives, housewives, all kinds of people. He'd bring them in, and he would have these people turning up that dial all the way, from the milk experiment,
To shock people.
They would have an actor, and they would say it was a deception. They would say, this is a cognitive test to see, if they learn the material properly. So if he gets the answer right, that's good. Don't do anything. But if he gets the wrong answer, you just got to shock him. And each time he gets it wrong, you got to shock him with more power. Go from 10 volts to 20 to 50 to 100 to 500 to 1,000. And when it gets to the higher levels, it's even said on the dial, danger. Could be fatal or something, or could be harmful, and then they had the actor in there, going ouch, but the person who was actually, who didn't realize it was, all a deception, and then they had a guy in a white coat saying, and so
it's
invariably the person would, once it got up into like 30 or 40, and it started, and the person would go, ow, in the other room. The person would say, I don't want to go on anymore. And so the authority figure would simply say, please go on. He wouldn't order them. He would just say, please continue the experiment. Please continue the experiment. And then if the person really protested, he would just say, this is very important to science. Please continue the experiment. And the people, something like 75 to 80% of the people went all the way, when the person was screaming and they were like sweating, they went all the way. And so the question, of course, is twofold. One is, how could people do that? These are good people, right? They would never hurt anyone. And then, and the answer to that is that we human beings, somehow at a deep level, I'm not sure if it's a deep level, it's a social level, but we are tribal, very much tribally oriented to follow an alpha male or an alpha figure, that's what the leaders of the tribe says, we'll do it, kind of just, and I think also, being raised in a culture of authoritarian hierarchical power structures and eating animal foods. The other question is, what is it about those people who just said, screw you, I'm not going any higher, no matter what you say, I'm not doing it, there was a good percentage. I think it should have been a lot higher, but it was I think it was 15 to 20% said no, I'm not.
About the same as the hypnosis group.
Yeah, right. Yeah, who just, and it turned out that those were, I mean, there were some studies, and I haven't gone, but they were people who were like protesting against wars or whatever was going on at that time, or protesting against military spending. And they were people that were kind of rebels, I guess, conscientious objectors to this and that, or whatever. That was part of what the thing was. They already had tendencies in that direction, I guess they found. But it's interesting, that this dynamic, we see it playing out now. And it seems to me that whoever's behind all this is, some people are saying that they're panicking. They're doing it so fast that it shows that they're desperate, and that may be true. It's hard to say. There are also some people say that there may be forces that are not even human. They may be coming through from psychic levels or whatever, UFO levels, or whatever it is, and maybe using people with lots of money, like the Rothschilds and Gates and whoever it is, who control these networks and sort of guiding them to have even more power and control, because humans wouldn't do this. But whoever's doing it is clearly very demonic. I mean, it's really a real attack on the beauty and love and celebration. I mean, it's an extremely violent, demonic war against nature and animals and humans that I think is
and against all that's beautiful in our culture.
Everything, yeah. It's like and so some people trace that back to the times of Babylonian, where the Sabbatean. I don't know if you've followed Sabbatean Frankists. The revival that happened in the 1600s, where they brought back when they had the Crusades went over, and then
the Khazars too.
Pardon me?
The Khazars.
Khazarian Mafia.
Khazarian Mafia.
Exactly, the Khazarian, right. The Khazars could be part of it too, right. But they brought this sort of satanic, demonic kind of rituals where they were child sacrifice and child cannibalism and all that stuff. They're doing really horrific things and working maybe with dark entities of some kind, and amazingly getting huge amounts of power. I mean, actually bringing in like the Rothschilds with all that banking money, getting them and all these other people, and then with the somehow weaving webs of control over the institutions in our society. A small minority of people, and the average human being thinks, no, that's people wouldn't do that. Nobody's like that.
Yes,
But actually, you're like that. If I was a cow, you'd be the same dang way, right? I mean.
It's sort of a continuum too. I mean, people talk about psychopathy, that about 4% of men and about 2% of women are psychopaths, meaning they really don't care, don't have the ability to empathize and have compassion.
Right.
But maybe that's on a continuum for all of us,
Yeah. It's these are the questions that come up.
Yeah.
Yes, Susie.
So, Will, you're about love. Both of you are about love. We're all about love and awareness and all that. And when you have someone calling you names or whatever, and then you said you wrote a love letter back, I understand about respect and acceptance and all that, and we need to be love. But at what point do we say, am I going to be friends with the Nazi next door?
Mm-hmm.
So at what point does our love and acceptance for others' perspective is like, no, actually now you are being dangerous, and I can't accept that. If someone is abusing a child, we don't say, well, live and let live. We say, no, actually you can't do that. So at what point, how do we deal with that? Because we're all trying to figure out, how do we deal with the people in our lives who don't see it and who tell us that we're dangerous and we're bad and we're ignorant and we're stupid and we're causing problems? How do we... I really don't know how to deal with that.
And we see them causing harm to society and maybe destroying our culture and destroying our own lives without even knowing they're doing it.
So do we love and accept? At what point do we say, actually, no, I don't accept what you're thinking and what you're doing and what you're saying? I don't.
I think Gandhi, he struggled with that and wrote, I think, very deeply. And he was always, made the point, which I think is what I try to do, is to separate the person from the action. You got to make that separation, because if you start saying, you are the problem, it's like their action is the problem. The person
And their own ignorance, their own conditioning.
Yeah, I really cultivate the view of them as wounded, because I think for me that makes it a lot easier. Because I've studied this quite a bit. Like the worst child abusers, when you go back, they were abused as kids. And when you see this poor little kid being abused, and how horribly, that traumatic, post-traumatic stress disorder kind of screws them up. And then when they do that to other kids, you hate them, you want to torture them for what they did, and you realize they were tortured. So instead of having this vindictiveness, you go, oh, I understand, I have compassion. You don't like the behavior, right? No, that's, but the being, you've got to have love for the being. Love for the being. But I wouldn't say hatred for the behavior, but the behavior is unskillful, it's harmful, it's, saying I'll do whatever I can to stop that behavior, to speak up against the behavior. But to hold the person in a sense of respect and love at the being, not the outer manifestation of how they're acting at the moment. That's what I had to do with this guy, because I just thought I could look beyond his outer form and know that he's a being who's worthy of respect, and so I try to just address that in him. I don't know if it probably didn't get through. I mean, maybe on some level it got through. But I think what's underlying your question also is the sense of urgency. That's what changes everything. And this is what we've been dealing with in the vegan movement. It's the same thing. It's like, well, you want to be nice to people who are eating animals, but you want to say, I'm speaking on behalf of the cows and the pigs and chickens, and now we're speaking on behalf of the children and future generations, and really human beings who don't want to be raped by needles and things. So there is a sense of urgency. And I think that's the thing, because a lot of people say, well, the sense of urgency overrides ethics. It's so urgent, I can hit the guy, I can shoot him with a gun because it's urgent, But I really think we have to be careful about that urgency one, because I just don't think the ends ultimately justify the means. I mean, we can't say because it's urgent, then we can use violence. I mean, that's when from my point of view, we have to take the bigger picture into account of multiple lifetimes. We're not just here for one life. I think that idea is a product of a very perverted, toxic culture that is so disconnected from consciousness that we just think we're a piece of meat, was born and will die, and that's all that matters is this lifetime. We have to realize that we're eternal consciousness that's going to manifest through thousands of vehicles, have thousands of experiences. Some will, and this is one of thousands, right? So you want to make sure that you're remembering that, and remembering that this is, when this play is over, it's like a play. One thing to remember is like on a play, you've got the protagonist, and you've got an antagonist, right? And they're maybe harming each other and whatever. And when the play is over, they go backstage and they say, "You did a great job. You really showed how to." Remember, we're all playing roles. And the people we think are like, "Oh man, they're so stupid or they're violent." After this, when we die and we go on, we're gonna, hey, I know you. I might be your daughter in the next life, whatever, So the Buddhist tradition says every being you ever meet, at one point has been your mother, and you've been their mother. So treat all beings with this compassion you would treat your own child or your own mother.
Well, like Jesus said, they forgive them, because they know not what they're doing.
Yeah, that's another way to look at it. Yeah, people are wounded, and so try to have that bigger picture view.
Killing them and all that like stuff.
That's a really good question. I think it's an important one for us to see how it actually plays out in our daily life and the choices that we make of how we live during this time. How much do we prepare? How much do we defend ourselves? do we get a gun or not? You know, do we get into when we have a, you know, what do we do? Where do we live? How much do we gather up? You know, 2 years worth of food, and if we do we give it to our neighbors who didn't get any? You know, or whatever. You know, when the supply lines completely collapse because people die and there's nobody to deliver the food. Or I mean, we're going into some major stuff.
It looks pretty dark in that way, but do you, I mean,
I know.
a lot of us, at least in this group, have had the feeling that it's going to work out. Is that just like, are we deceiving ourselves? Or we're creating it that way? I mean, what do you think about that?
Well, I think, you know, there's two ways of looking at it. In the big picture, it's going to work out, you know, ultimately. But it's sobering to think of it. For example, you know, I mean, 10,000 years ago in Iraq, for the very first time, some human beings started to own wild sheep and then wild goats, and then later wild cows and then other animals as property for food. And if I was a wild sheep or a wild goat back then, I would be like, holy crap. You know, we're getting exploited. We're becoming livestock. This is terrible. I mean, I'm owned. My kids are going to be born into slavery. 10,000 years later, it's still happening.
Yeah. Worse than ever.
I mean, it might take 10,000 years of human slavery. I mean, it's not over. I mean, it could be. I mean, think of the suffering through all those generations of cows and pigs and chickens and goats and sheep, and I mean, being tortured and killed generationally, like thousands of generations, really. I mean, like.
But they can't really liberate themselves, it doesn't seem like. Can
Right.
we? I mean, so it's like.
We the same.
Well, if you have children born, see, the thing is, animals, when they're not born into captivity, they will fight for their lives. But when they're born into captivity, and when children are born into captivity, I feel that right now. I feel like when I was a kid, I had so much more freedom than kids today have. I mean, it's like I grew up, we never locked the door.
Yeah.
I could walk anywhere. I would walk down to the downtown, go to the 5 and 10. It was like a mile and a half, 2 miles away. My parents could care less. You just go, whatever, do whatever you want. You know, it's like, I never wore a helmet. I never had a seatbelt. I never had a belt. You know, it was.
No masks.
I mean, I didn't watch TV to speak of. I was really in the dirt, running around, getting dirty and playing, and you know, I think these kids are sterilized. They don't realize how imprisoned they are.
Yeah, and this whole mask and social distancing thing is,
And now-
it's a wonder. I mean, how is this going to play out? You know,
And
as
these
they grow up.
kids, did you read that? I mean, I just said that today, that the study of Brown University, that they've been doing the IQ tests for years, you know, and the IQ tests of 1 and 2 year olds, they have this, way of testing their IQ. It's always been around 100. For the first year now, in 2021, they did the IQ test of 1 or 2 year olds, and it's 78.
Oh, wow.
78. I mean, that's like really low. That's like stupid. I mean, like, that's the average IQ because they can't develop their intelligence with masks.
Oh, because they can't
They're
see.
dumbing down.
They can't
So
see
that's-
faces.
They can't see faces. And when I wrote the world piece, I have it in here, one paragraph. I talk about how scientists, because it's true, even back, for the last 20 years, scientists were hard at work trying to engineer and create cows and pigs and chickens who would not rebel at being hyper-confined, at not being able to turn around their entire life, who would just sort of lay there and nurse, give milk, and not bang their heads and I can't stand this, let me know. And they still do that. They still, drive themselves crazy, and that's bad for profits.
Right.
They want completely compliant animals that are incapable, that are completely numb, emotionally and mentally. That's what they want, And so, of course that's what they want us to be, right? They want humans that are completely numb, compliant, and incapable of not really feeling, not knowing what it's like to feel the cold water, and I mean, I can't believe it. I used to go to hotels, I could always take a cold rinse in the shower. Nowadays, they turn that off. It's like lukewarm. You can go to, it's like in a lot of the restrooms, they always used to have hot and cold. Now they have one and it's lukewarm. I can't splash cold water in my face. I travel in airports all over the world. They changed it. It's just lukewarm. I mean, everything's lukewarm. It's really,
Yeah.
there's a reason, I think. I mean, we're disconnecting from the natural power, the natural connection that we have. When you have people disconnected from that, and then they don't like cold water. Oh, I don't like that. No, I don't like, you know, I'm afraid of bacteria and viruses. You know, I'm afraid of dirt. I'm afraid of all, I don't want to go out into the nature. It's scary out there. You know? Total prisoners. You know, I mean, if we don't feel happy going out into the woods, gosh, I love it in the woods. You know, but that's the plan. I mean, I think it's a plan. It's either that, it's either a plan. It's a plan, but it's also just the way it goes. When you do animal agriculture, you disconnect people from nature. Pretty soon they're afraid of bacteria, afraid of everything outside.
Afraid of bacteria and viruses.
Afraid of bacteria and viruses when they're our good friends. I mean, if they all die, we die.
Yeah. And recently a neighbor came to the front door to give me something, and she said, "Have you been vaccinated?" And I said, "No." And she said, "I'm sorry, I can't come in then."
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just saw, you know, I'm on the mailing list for the Rochester Vegan Society, and they're having Milton Mills giving a lecture there in a couple of weeks. And it says right on the thing, and it's outdoors. It's in a park, in a pavilion outdoors in fresh air. And it says, the only people who will be allowed to attend this lecture are people who have been vaccinated and are wearing masks.
Well,
And it's a lecture on veganism,
wow. Wow.
you know, on how to have a, you know,
Wow.
a healthy vegan diet.
It's really good that you're sharing this. I think
Yeah,
that we
it's
need to get this message out.
Complete insanity like that. I had
Yeah.
a question around, you were talking about, like I'm from Santa Cruz, and a lot of I had friends there for years, right? And many of them were protesting the war. They had been, you know, activists in different ways. But when this came down, almost every single one of them went to this, including my wife, my former wife. Very progressive, thoughtful people that really care about other people. But when this came down, it was, and so I was just looking, I mean, I've had different explanations of it, but it's like, it's so interesting to me that so many, in other words, so many of them went that way. It wasn't like, you know, it was like I was the only one, except for, you know, I found other people that were opposing to this. But I was just wondering if you had an explanation for the kind of, I consider it like a mass hypnosis. That's the only thing that's really gotten me an explanation. Like, okay, this we just have a mass hypnosis. People are cognitively dissonant with it, because like if the world that my wife had were to be actually, I mean, if it was to include my way of thinking, everything would collapse. I mean, is that
Yeah.
what it is? I mean, it's like
Well, okay.
the
So I
natural
think,
food store. Well, I just want to say, the natural food store, which was like one of the best in the country, Staff of Life,
Yeah.
complete
Right.
enforcement of all the Nazi mask wearing, and you know, probably they're doing vaccine mandates. I don't know, but it's just like, I knew these people. I knew the people who started the store. I was with them when they started it,
right.
and I was going, wait a second, what happened to you guys? I mean,
Yeah,
it's the
that's-
same thing. You're the vegan.
I think you're right. It's basically a tribal mentality that was, I think it was engineered. And so what happened, I think, was the Democratic Party. See, I was a very far left as left almost you could go, like really far left. And so I didn't even want to vote for Democrats because they were not far left enough. In the beginning, I would only vote for peace and freedom candidates, you know, whatever.
Right.
But then I started voting Democrat. I would never vote for Republican in a million years. Because the Republicans were always the party of corporations, right?
Yeah.
The Democrats were the party of the workers
Yeah.
and the environment. And that was me. All right, workers, environment. So I was always a Democrat, and I felt, you know, that was my tribe in a sense. You know,
Yeah.
there's other tribe, these Republicans, these corporate, terrible, you know, corrupt people. But with time, what happened, I think, was both parties got bought out, and the very savvy, I mean, these people are smart. They figured out that the pharmaceutical industry started funneling most of its money to the Democrats, the Democratic Party.
That's right.
And under the Clintons, they brought in a completely like an anti-worker kind of very pro-capitalist. Made the Democratic Party, just completely took it away from its worker, supporting the workers. So Hillary Clinton at a certain point talked about the deplorables, the blue collar deplorables. And so the whole Democratic Party was shifted over to, and then to hating Trump, right? And so, and so I think there was this kind of a tribal identification of vegans and progressives all together with the Democratic Party, which became the much more fascist party, actually, much more fascist, much more destructive. And the Republican Party became more the party of actual freedom, of caring about our situation. And so it switched, just kind of switched. But most people didn't realize that they didn't realize it, that they had been manipulated, and they kept their loyalty, and they started using these very progressive sounding words like the right to health care. Everyone should have the right to health care. What that meant was everyone should have the right to be vaccinated. And they had people giving money to these progressive agencies, like funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, to try to help the overpopulation problem. We had this overpopulation problem, and the Democrats really got into that and didn't realize that was the eugenics movement, which was basically an anti-human movement. That humans are the problem. We got to hate humanity, and that brought into the vegan movement an anti-human movement. And you have a lot of vegans who hate human beings. And I think that because they say, well, animals are suffering, it's all because of humans. And so there's this really hatred of humans. And they almost want to see humans, get rid of humans. And so this, all kinds of tribal loyalties grew up, and people got swept along with that. They couldn't go against it. I mean, I went through the whole year when Trump was still in office. As soon as I said anything about let's question masking or anything, I was always everybody said, you're a Trumper, you love Trump. I had nothing to do with Trump, for God's sake. But that's all they could say was I've been taken over by, I'm a Trump lover, But I have to say, I was glad to see that he was in some ways really resisting the loss of our freedoms. Yes. I was like, God, he was so much better than the Democrats, who were like all on board for destroying our constitutional freedoms. And so when we were in Florida, I actually went to some of these Trump rallies. I wanted to see what it was like. And this was like the last thing I ever would have done a few years before. I went to these Trump rallies, and I was like, God, these are my people. It was amazing. They were so nice. They were so loving, and they were like, we've got to stop this destruction of our basic freedom of telling us, we have to get wear a mask and get vaccinated, and we have no rights to tell our children to raise our children the way we want to have them raised. Your children, because what the Democrats came in with they became the party of the elite who own the livestock, And I saw this video the other day of a woman who was going to give birth in this hospital, and they wanted to vaccinate her baby after her baby was born, and she was protesting. She says, "No, I don't want my baby to be vaccinated after, no, it's my baby." And the hospital administrator came in, and she explained to the woman, she said, "While the baby is inside you, it's your baby. But when the baby comes out, it's not your baby, it's our baby." So she said, She actually said that, and they had it on video. And it just hit me because that's exactly what everybody who owns a dairy says, right? You know, as soon as I own your baby, and I own you, and I'm going to take your baby, and I'm going to kill your baby for veal, and now I'm going to impregnate you again, take your baby. It's not your baby. And the mother's like, no, it's my baby. I want to nurse my baby. No, you're not going to nurse your baby. You know, so so that's what's happening. You know, we're becoming the livestock, and it's really the Democratic Party. I mean, both of them, but especially the Democratic Party. That's really reverting back to its roots, right? You know, the roots of the Democratic Party. They were the ones. That was the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, they were the ones. It was the Republicans that were protecting the black people from slavery. The Democratic Party has always actually been the evil party in a way. And now they're showing, I think, they're showing their true colors again. And, but both of them are really controlled. I mean, so we need a way to, you know, on a grassroots level to just create a health freedom party or something. Another party. Okay, yeah.
So one of the things I was going to say when you said, well, now we're becoming the slaves, I think the reality is we always were the slaves, and now we're becoming aware of it.
Aware.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of truth. It's becoming really obvious.
And we're seeing it, and that's why, I mean, it's scary for us, but it's always been here.
Right.
And we're actually going through the higher levels of consciousness now. We're rising out of it. But waking up is a little bit jarring.
Yeah. Yes.
What did you mean when you said vegans hated humans? Could you?
Yeah. There's a movement within veganism. What's it called? The anti-natalist movement. You know that movement?
What is it called?
Anti-natalist.
Oh.
Natalist.
Similar to deep color.
Anti-natalist means never have children. You just don't ever have children. Right. That's the anti-natalism, and it's very strong in the vegan movement. And I can understand why. I mean, I can definitely understand why. It's like you've got a lot of kids. You know, we should adopt. We shouldn't have our own kids. But you know, there is something. You know, it's getting to the point where people can't even have kids. You know, I mean, they're so sick, and I don't think it's an accident. I mean, but there is a. I mean, believe me, when I was writing sometime in the early days, when I was writing on Facebook about these issues, like the masks are harmful. They make people sick, and that the medications are you know killing people. There were vegans that were writing good. You know, the fewer people on the earth, the better. We want to kill people.
I know someone
Less
I know someone like that.
Yeah, they really hate humans. There's vegans who hate humans. You know, and I can understand it too. I mean, you see what humans do to animals, how they torture animals. They go, "Oh, I hate humans," you know. But that's not the way. You don't hate them. It's not. They've been programmed. We got to love people so we can heal the wounds and not act that way. Yeah.
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 Well, this
So-
is, yeah.
So I think that tribalism is a thing very deeply in us, and I think part of our awakening is getting beyond the tribalism to see us all as a human family and a family of all living beings, and see ourselves as spiritual, you know, as consciousness essentially. That's the real awakening, I think.
It's really about enlightenment, isn't it?
Ultimately, there's no way out but up. Yeah.
I'd kind of like to, I'm kind of going to jumble two questions into one. One is the spectrum of authoritarianism, and the other, and what you see about, you know, the extremes. We see what's going on in Australia, and et cetera.
Right.
But then also the crisis that's occurring economically, environmentally, and so part of me thinks that a whole bunch of things are going to come together, and all of a sudden the physical systems are going to collapse. And then how will the authoritarian plan be implemented then? I'm curious what your thoughts.
Yeah, that's something Bevel and I were talking about on our long drive over here. We drove 12 hours yesterday, and it's like, how, you know, that's a question, because if you know, there's different theories, you know, that they're going to kill off people in, you know, like 20% in the first year, and then another 20%, so it doesn't collapse too fast, so they can kind of keep all the things running more or less, so they can maintain control, right? You can't maintain control if everything just collapses, then it's complete. Everybody's just on survival mode. which may happen though. I mean, and I think a lot of it depends on how we as humans respond to everything. If we can stay in touch with each other and help each other and prepare, I do think it's really good to prepare. I mean, we have at least enough food for a year, and I think, and we're independent for electricity, and we have 70 fruit trees. We have a lot of food. We're growing, we have a food forest. We have a lot of food we're growing.
We can all move over to your place.
Come
on.
We don't really.
I mean, I was, back in the 1980s. I was talking about we got to move to the land and get self-sufficient because the thing is going to collapse. I remember I've been saying this for years, but now it's finally happening.
That's right.
And then also building new life, kind of a new lifestyle. We created a freedom cell, a vegan freedom cell, up to 8 people, like little groups, and then recreating one's life and helping each other and kind of like a little family of like-minded.
You have that where you live.
Yeah.
We have a
Instead
cell,
of
freedom cell.
blood family, which usually doesn't work anymore in these times.
That's kind of what we've been doing too. Yeah.
Groups of 8. They say 8's a good number. So if you have 16, maybe make 2 groups. Because 8 is a number that if it gets more than 8, it's a little bit hard to really, But 8 is a good just to kind of have each other's back, kind of, and help each other, and sort of be in the same general area and same basic values. So we are almost up to 8 vegans who live in our area who are also health freedom people. To make to have networks of these little groups, like cells, so that we're not just totally isolated, taking care of ourselves, but we have a few other people, and to try to make more of those. Try to just foster that movement. So that was there's a guy named Derek Brode. I interview him actually on the this upcoming summit.
The summit.
Yeah, go to worldpeacediet.com/summit.
Oh yeah, tell them about the summit thing.
Yeah, I've been working really hard on this. We're doing an online summit, October 15th to 17th. It's called the Worldwide Vegan Summit for Truth and Freedom.
Wow.
And so the basic idea is that there's been all these people in the health freedom movement, but they're eating meat and dairy, right? They never talk about animals. And you have all these vegans who are just completely lost in the narrative of the big pharmaceutical industry. But there are some great vegan pioneers who are strong vegan authors and researchers and leaders in the vegan movement who are also leaders in the health freedom movement. And I found 14 of those people, 15 including myself. So I interviewed them. I've already done the interviews, and they're great. T. Colin Campbell is one of them, and Gabriel Cousins and Brian Clement.
Please make yourself comfortable.